Welcome to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Sade Curry, and I believe every divorced woman deserves a romantic relationship where she feels safe, loved, and cherished. You can create the most amazing life after divorce, and I will teach you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Sade Curry, and with me today, I have Stacey Mendelson. Stacey is a friend and a colleague. She is also a life coach, and she is a life coach for women going through high conflict divorces, which I can tell you for sure that I needed Stacey about 6 years ago. But I'm so glad that she's doing this work today. She is here to tell you about her work, and she's here to tell you her dating after divorce and remarriage story. Welcome, Stacey. Please introduce yourself to the listeners.
Thanks, Sade. It's such a pleasure to be here. So my name is Stacey Mendelson, and Sade and I both attended the same school for becoming a life coach around the same time, I think. Yeah. And I run a business called Lifeline Coaching and Consulting, which is a coaching and consulting service that helps women navigate a high conflict divorce. That's exactly what I do. So I take all of my life coaching skills to do that. In my previous life, I was a veterinarian. I was a vet for 24 years. People often say to me, how does a vet become a life coach? Like what? I don't really get that. But believe it or not, after 24 years in practice, I had a higher calling after going through my own extremely high conflict divorce. And I knew I had information I had to impart to the world and help other people through it and help them not make all the mistakes that I made during my high conflict divorce. And it turns out, now that I'm a life coach and a veterinarian, that life coaches and veterinarians have a lot in common. It uses the same basic meta skills because both people are guides that help people navigate both an expensive and emotional journey. I did this with my puppy owners until they had a senior dog, and I do it now with my clients going through high conflict divorce. We develop strategies and skill sets so that they can walk the path, the critical path that they need to walk.
Amazing. Amazing. I love it. And I can see how, because I have owned a couple of puppies in my lifetime, and it's quite the journey. It's quite the journey itself. I'd love for you to define a high conflict divorce. And I know this is going to be so important for me to hear, first of all, and for a lot of the listeners to hear, because there's this sense when you're going through a divorce, high conflict divorce, that it's like, why can't you guys just get along? Why can't you just co-parent peacefully? Why can't you just do it for the kids? And anyone who hasn't gone through that, understandably, can't figure out why people appear to be creating so much drama and putting themselves through so much emotional turmoil around something that ought to be simple.
Right? It ought to be simple. So here's what creates a high conflict divorce. It's really actually pretty simple. I've distilled it down. You have one person out of two who values punishment over resolution. That is really the ingredients for a high conflict divorce. So who is that person? Well, it's never the person that works with me, because these people don't want to coach. They want to create conflict and they want to punish their opponent. So a high conflict divorce almost always is driven by one person. Often that person is somebody with a mental health problem, addiction problem, personality disorder, cluster B personality disorder, narcissistic, borderline, all of those weird and wild things. So really, they're not the people that I work with. My job in the people that I work with is to recognize the qualities of their opponent. And most of them read from the same textbook, which is nice. They're predictable. And we figure out skills and strategies to manage and deal with and walk around all of the obstacles and bombs that they hurl our way.
Yeah. Is it even possible to quote unquote have a good, and I'm using the word good because I'm trying to find like, because already if you're already in court with this kind of person, there's no good resolution. In my, in my personal experience, I did not have a coach walking me through my divorce. I spent a lot of my divorce in a lot of emotional turmoil, wondering why this was happening to me, feeling like everything was against me, the lawyers, everything, even my lawyer. If I felt like the system didn't understand what was happening. And your goal is to bring about the best resolution. What makes that possible? Because even for me, I'm just like, oh my God, is it possible? When I think about my ex, I'm like, it is not possible to, to do this. But obviously, you're doing this every day.
It is so possible. What it takes really over everything else is gray matter. It takes brains and stealth. There are going to be certain obstacles in our way. The obstacles are pretty predictable. Things like accusations of, like false accusations of alienation.
Yep.
Sound familiar? There are so many predictable, like somebody who engages in vexatious litigation, like unnecessary litigation, baiting us on communication. There's so many obstacles that I see that are really pretty run-of-the-mill now. So at first, when you separate from a person like this and they start hurling bombs at you, you're going to feel very, very afraid. That's when you need to call me because we will move from afraid towards amused. And that really is the secret, because when you are in the mindset and the space of understanding the things that really are a danger and a problem versus the drama, like separating those things out, well, the danger, we can deal with that. There are methods of dealing with that in a court, outside of a court, with parenting assessors, with pediatricians, in all the ways that we need to deal with it. So we distill it down to what are the things we're really going to worry about, and what of those things can we control, what can't we control, and what are we purposely going to think about it and do about it, for sure. So it's very, my approach is quite pragmatic. I think having a community of women in a similar situation, because being in a situation like a high conflict divorce can feel very alienating, and it's all so shocking. But then when you're surrounded by other individuals who are, in the same trench that you're in, and you've got a guide to help you out of that trench, it's so much better. It's exactly what I wish I had when I was in the trenches.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. You just said in like 3 minutes what it took me about 6 years to learn. Piece together all over the place. And what you said about going from afraid to amused is so effective. I had watched a YouTube video on narcissistic abuse somewhere in the middle of my divorce. And this gentleman said, when you're dealing with a narcissist, just imagine you're holding up a, plucked chicken. And then instead of the chicken's head, just put your ex's face on there and make it wiggle. And I just burst out laughing, and that has stayed with me. It's a little visual that I've used from time to time to just kind of de-escalate my own emotions when something scary appears to happen.
Absolutely. That's so good, because, marinating in a sea of panic is not good for you physically, obviously. It's really hard to show up as an effective parent when you're in that sea of panic. And then if you're also a professional, like I was a veterinarian, it's not easy to get up and do your job effectively. So the stakes are very high. And my goal for my clients is to always have them operating from your clients probably know the model, from the F line, the feeling line of calm, confident. Like, how are we going to move from panic to calm, confident? Or, any kind of fear. Another thing my clients struggle with is anger, and moving from anger to calm, confident. That's where we always want to be operating. That's where we're going to take the most effective action.
Do you wonder exactly how divorced women just like you are meeting eligible men who want a real relationship and a commitment? They're doing it by dating with their core values. Your core values are the GPS that lead you to the partner you've been looking for. When you use your core values on dating apps, text messages, and at social events, you will easily connect with your true match partner without chasing, settling, or wasting time with non-committal men. I have taught exactly how to do this in the 2-hour Core Values Dating Blueprint course available on my website, shadecurry.com/dating. That's SADECURRY.com/dating. You will learn exactly how to identify your core values and use them on your dating profile, how to ask the right questions via text, and how to tell the right stories on dates so that you attract the right people and repel those who aren't right for you. If you're ready to meet your true match, hop over to shadecurry.com/dating or click the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode. Wonderful. Oh my gosh, Stacey, your work is so important. I want to tell everyone about it. So for everyone listening, because we're going to get to the good part, the fun part of the conversation in just a minute. If you are going through a high conflict divorce and you are still experiencing panic or anger or like just being blindsided every couple of days, give Stacey a call, check out the show notes. Her information will be there. But now we want to move to like a little bit of the lighter part of the conversation, which is your dating journey, because you're now divorced, you are now remarried, and you have
remarried.
Yes. How many years have you been remarried?
In October, it will be 3 years. So I'm pretty recently remarried. Yeah.
Yeah. And how long between your divorce, whenever you count it from, how long did it take you to kind of get back out there?
So I separated in 2014, and my story used to be that none of it was my choice. He was having an affair, and I took all the power away from myself. I had nothing to do with it. I was the perfect wife, perfect mother. He was busy having an affair. I've changed my story. I've had many iterations of the story, and I think that's part of the path of getting ready to date. I will tell you, when I was in the thick of it, and I imagine you felt the same way, Sade, I was in no position to date. In fact, I have clients who say to me, I just want to join a nunnery. I never want to be subject to this again. And of course, when you're having bombs hurled at you, the last thing you want to do is date. So, and
for a lot of people, the bombs are being hurled now, but you've also had this potentially awful experience for 5, 10, 15, 20 years that has culminated in the worst of it. So I was like, I don't want to talk to anyone. I want my space.
Yeah. Or let me change teams. You also hear about that too.
Yes, I've heard that. And I totally understand.
So do I. So my dating journey happened by accident. I was still in that headspace, and it was, I guess, 2 years post-separation. I was invited to play golf, and there was somebody else invited as a fourth in the golf group, and we started to date, which was super fun for me. And I actually have a blog post about it. His name was George, and he wasn't the guy. He was just a guy. And it sort of got me over my hump. I like to say I humped my hump. And
I love it.
It sort of acknowledged the fact that there wasn't something wrong with me, and men found me attractive and interesting. So, okay. But I was still not actively seeking dating. We dated for a while. This one didn't end up being my husband. So I really was never actively dating. I started dating my husband shortly thereafter, but there's a bit of lineage to it that I'll tell you about. So I have this amazing husband now, like you do. I see, from what I see.
Yeah, he is pretty cool.
Yeah, my husband is so kind. I mean, for me, kindness trumps everything. It's the most important quality. He's such a kind man. He's smart. he's handsome, and he's nerdy, which, like, no more bad boys.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, please. So my husband is a widower, and I knew my husband through my entire marriage, which was a pretty abusive marriage. But most of my marriage, he lived over in France with his wife. And I knew him because he was actually my mother-in-law's stepson-in-law. My mother-in-law had repartnered. Her new partner had children. One of his daughters was married to who's now my husband. So he was technically my mother-in-law's step-son-in-law. Hard. You may need a whiteboard for this one.
So basically related, but not by blood.
Yeah, not by blood, and quite distant. And I would see him kind of once a year at a family function with his wife, who was my mother-in-law's stepdaughter. Lovely woman. They were great. They moved back to Toronto eventually, and she was diagnosed with cancer. My mother-in-law reached out to me, Stacey, I'm a medical person, I'm a vet, I'm the only medical person in the family, can you help advocate for her? Of course I'm going to help advocate for this girl. She's a lovely girl. I spent a lot of time with her through her chemo appointments, and I got to know her and her husband, who turned out to be my husband. All the while I was in the thick of hideous litigation. I was in no position to date at all. Sure enough, she died. She had a terminal cancer. And her husband, David, who's now my husband, and I we're friends. We were friendly. He was going through terrible grief, and I was going through terrible litigation. So David kind of became my girlfriend before he ever became my boyfriend. We just were friends who kind of palled around together. He ended up joining me for a yoga class, and then he joined my yoga club. Suddenly he was like my yoga girlfriend. But one thing is, my mother-in-law, who technically was my ex-mother-in-law, kept promoting us to see each other. So when I would have her for dinner, which I did often, like I ditched the husband but kept the mother-in-law, she'd always say, are you inviting David? Why don't you invite David? So David and I hung out together a lot. We worked on a few projects together, such as my litigation. We worked on a complaint to the physicians about his late wife's diagnosis. I saw there was synergy there. There was we had a great working relationship. There was an amassing of gray matter, which I loved, and just a very nice, totally platonic friendship. In fact, it never even crossed my mind that I might be romantically interested in him. He was so nerdy.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Now, before you go on about how you guys made the decision to go from friends to, lovers, how did you get to keep your mother-in-law? Because mind blowing. And that's a very unusual piece of the puzzle. Well, my ex-husband acted like a complete, am I allowed to say asshole? You're allowed to say whatever you want.
He was ridiculous, ridiculous. He did crazy things. He sent me pictures of coffins. He had my son investigated by the police for apparent child abuse from the mother. It was just one ridiculousness after another. When you're going through it, these things are very frightening. Now I look back at it with amusement. These are great gifts of evidence. This is the kind of stuff me and my clients collect to win our cases. So she saw his behavior. She felt it was horrible. It was uncalled for. It was not child-centered. She hated the way it was affecting my son. And she had the balls to stand up to him and say, don't do this. You already did this to your two other kids with his wife from before. Why are you doing this again now? If you're not happy being married, just have a peaceful separation and end this nonsense. But again, this is the high conflict opponent, more interested in punishment over resolution. He had to punish me for having the audacity to say no more to the marriage where he's sleeping with another woman. Right. To stop being a doormat. I had the audacity. Yep. And so she actually sided with me and saw that I was always child-centered. And so and it turned out I looked after her. I ended up being her power of attorney. She recently passed away. I spoke at her funeral. He wasn't there. She was like another mother to me.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes.
That is amazing. And I'm so happy for you that you had someone who saw what
it's
was
very
happening.
Validating, right?
Yes. And I think for me and maybe some other women, there was, at least for me, in talking about what was happening, there was just a little bit of shame.
Yes.
Because sometimes I would talk about what was happening and the first response would be maybe a lack of belief or like, well, are you sure that happened? And I think that caused me to, in some spaces, to like just not talk about what was happening, not able to say, hey, this person just had me investigated for abuse. That's totally not true. And he's just using it to manipulate the system, or things that were said about me having an affair when he was the one. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And not having that person who says, yeah, I see what's happening, just can create a lot of shame. So I'm just really glad that you had, even if it was just one person who was able to do that for you.
Yes. I actually, like, speaking of shame, that's an interesting point because, you know, if you're a victim of domestic violence, as I was, and I were you as well, Sade?
Not in the classic sense.
Yeah.
A lot of intimidation and
threats. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, domestic violence is a very subjective term. And so depending on who you're talking to, we can maybe consider that. There's a lot of shame in all of that. And I remember the time that I actually sort of put a stake in the ground and decided not to have any shame about anything that happened. I decided that, like, all of the craziness that happened, I'm not responsible for, and it's not my burden to carry. And I did that for my son because I didn't want him to feel any shame going into high school at all. So that's like, we left the shame at the door and we spoke very openly about anything that might have occurred. And this enabled me to advocate for him at school. My son has some special needs. And the more that his teachers understood about the climate at home and what he was being subjected to, the better they could serve him. So I decided I'm going to advocate for him without shame. Him and I didn't do anything wrong here. We've always behaved ethically, that we have nothing to feel ashamed about.
I love that. We might have to do another episode about shame.
It was very liberating. I'll say that.
Yes. Yeah. And totally. And I remember when I first started talking about my divorce and putting it out on the internet, and I knew just one or two other women who were doing the same thing in my circles. And it was so freeing to be able to say I was in an abusive marriage. I was in a toxic marriage. These things happened. It was difficult, but it was so freeing. And I love what you said about saying, being able to repeat to ourselves, I didn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
I didn't do anything wrong here. I showed up every day. I was all in on my marriage. Like, the thought, I was so stupid, I should have known better, I should have ended it. You know, the real truth is you were all in on your marriage. I was all in on my marriage. I had a kid with special needs. I was all in on helping remediate him and, you know, trying to be a decent wife. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but I don't really think I did anything very aberrant or wrong here. So this is something that affects people amongst all socioeconomic backgrounds.
100%. And there's a book I love on shame, Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. And he talks about visualizing that ball of shame that just creeps up, and in your mind, figuring out who owns this, really. Right. And then like laying it at that person's feet. All right. Who owns this in this situation? Because actually my parents were divorced, and there was domestic violence in that marriage. And even the shame of having domestic violence happening between my parents and my dad and his second wife, I carried that around as a young person.
Right.
Part of my healing was like saying, oh, no, that belonged to them. He did that or she did that. And so just throwing out there for anyone who's listening, if you are experiencing shame over things that happen, I thought it was just important that we stop and talk about that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And really, when you decide to drop your shame, it's a very attractive quality to those around you. I mean, one of the reasons I remember as a veterinarian, my clients would come in and tell me everything, like you tell a hairdresser, like they tell me everything. They tell me about their kids who are having drug problems and this and that, because like I grew up with a brother with a drug problem and he did die of an overdose, but I decided not to have any shame about it. And as soon as you drop that, it's like it attracts it like bees to honey for other people to share their stories with you.
Yes, 100%. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Stacey. All right. So now your friends, going from friends to lovers.
My new friend, David, my yoga girlfriend, my work on different projects.
Did you ever think, I don't want to ruin this friendship? Because that's a thought I hear a lot from women.
Yes. But at first, I didn't even have the inclination that the friendship could be anything, but we were just hanging out all the time together. And I remember distinctly the night in January, we went out for dinner together. He was taking me out for dinner to celebrate a win. I had had something published about his wife had died of lung cancer, and I had a letter they had done an expose with the doctor who had treated her. And I wrote a letter to the editor that gave a different perspective and mentioned his wife. And I got published. And he said, we're going to go out and celebrate. And I remember sitting across the table from him in this lovely restaurant in Toronto and looking at him and thinking, I really like this person. Like, I really like him to the core. And from then, over the next 3 months, my brain started to think about it. And it was like such a slow burn. And I think he was on the same trajectory. So I remember speaking with him one day and saying to him, I think it's going to be hard for me when you start dating. And his answer was, well, I don't have to start dating.
Oh.
And that's when we had that really uncomfortable conversation of what would this look like if we went from friendship, like we were best of friends for the last year, to something more. And we kind of hashed it out like two adults, like two colleagues, and discussed it and decided, let's give this a go. And from that moment, I mean, we've been inseparable ever since. We just have a great partnership, built on the foundation of a very solid friendship.
So I have my thoughts about men and friendships with women. So I want to ask. I want to ask you the question first. Was the moment that the light bulb turned on for you, how far before that did the light bulb turn on for him?
He said quite a bit before that. In fact, we joke about it. A few months prior to that, I said, well, let's go over to our joint mother-in-laws together. She'll be so delighted to see us together. And I made like some snide comment, she'll be so delighted, but that's never going to happen. And so that started him thinking many months before, why is she saying that that's never going to happen? So I think he was a few months before me. And the funny thing is, his best friend knew the whole time, like he was falling in love with me, and he wasn't going to date anybody.
Yeah, which was my theory about guys, is that when a guy's interested, I was like, I don't know how long guys actually stick around as best friends unless they're somewhat interested. I mean, give or take. I know there's so many different situations, but it's just a theory I have. Like, it's a little bit of a generalization that if he's around this much, maybe there's a potential that he really likes you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think there was. He's the kind of guy, though, that maybe would not have started that discussion. It was me who started the discussion.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, men are humans too. Somehow it's like the movies or TV has said men are a certain way, or quote unquote men initiate, and I put initiate in quotes because what does initiate mean? And why? Right? Why does it have to be the man who says, okay, well, let's have this conversation about moving forward together? One of the things I've noticed is sometimes a woman will say, well, the guys who don't initiate are the ones who are low effort men. I was like, no, they were just low effort men and happened to not initiate, right? You can have a high effort man who initiates, and you can have a high effort man who lets you initiate. Like, it's not a problem. What you want to look for is the quality of the person that you're looking at.
Yeah, I think his reluctance to initiate, I think eventually he would have, but his reluctance is, I think, deeply rooted in respect for women. He's exceedingly respectful of women.
Yeah. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because as a human, people are just different. Men are different. You have men who are more, I guess, I don't want to say extroverted isn't the right word, but maybe we'll speak more, are more direct. And then there are men who are not quite as direct, but the quality of the human is really what matters. All right. So how did you, I guess at that point, since you have been friends for so long, you must have just known he was the one. Was there a point where you were like, well, I'm ready to recommit? Did that change along the way?
I think I've always been a serial monogamist. I have no interest in being in a relationship that's non-committal, both friendships and intimate relationships. I think that, I'm all in on them as a person. Getting married, though, that I wasn't really into, but he was. That was very important to him. So we were together a long time, and after a year of, dating and having a romantic relationship, he moved into my house. My son, he was a welcome addition for my son and I. He's been a wonderful step parent to my son. But he wanted to get married. It was important to him. He's kind of an old-fashioned guy. And that kind of public declaration of commitment meant something to him. So I needed to get coached on that, because I had some thoughts in the way of getting
Let's hear them.
What's that?
I said, let's hear them. What were your thoughts about getting married?
It's very helpful. It was so lucky, really, that I had so many coach friends. I think that I felt I didn't deserve to be married again because I had so badly screwed up marriage in the past. So I didn't think I was worthy of having the title of married anymore. I think I carried shame.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like, even if I did get married again, like having someone in my space might not feel good, or there's better distance between me? Like, I want a partner, but then it's better if we have a little bit of distance.
We lived like we were married. I mean, that wasn't it for me. I just felt the actual act of it and the title of it, after having gone through like this World War III divorce, this like Hurricane 5 level divorce that cost so much money, so much time, so many parties affected. My parents got sued. Like, I felt, how could I bring this upon the world? Like, how dare me get married again? That's what it was for me. It was this, I think, a bunch of aberrant thoughts, really, that really were not necessary, but basically coming down to, I don't deserve to get married again. I totally fucked up the last one. Who am I to get married again? Sorry.
Like there was something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Almost like you were too broken to.
Yeah. I wasn't worthy of it. I didn't deserve it.
Wow. How did you unwind that? Like, I know you said you got coached, but what was your new set of thoughts?
For me, I didn't even know that was sitting inside of me, and just becoming aware that was really what was holding me back from marrying this amazing person. I would do anything for him. So I had to consider getting married to him because it was important to him. And I understood that my son was all in. He liked the idea of us getting married. So he wasn't the obstacle. Yeah. It was this one thought. And once I was able to kind of take it out and look at it, and I realized what a total fundamental misunderstanding that was with the way the world works, of course I deserve to be married again. I'm actually really good at marriage. My marriage wouldn't have lasted as long as it did if not for me.
I love that.
Yeah. So I had to sort of identify the thought that was sort of my linchpin that was keeping me, which was, I'm like a pro at screwing up a marriage. I just had the worst divorce on the planet. How could I get married again? And then realizing I'm actually a boss at being married. This marriage should have ended 10 years ago.
Yes. Oh my gosh. What a light bulb. So good. I'm actually really good at marriage. Yeah. And I know many of the listeners, I know many of you are experiencing the same thing where you're like, oh, I had this terrible divorce, but what if you were really good at your marriage? Like, what if you were the one that held it together? And that is evidence that you more than deserve happiness after divorce.
Yes. Yeah. So we ended up getting married in Las Vegas. We eloped.
That's awesome. The pictures out of Las Vegas, the weddings out of there. I'm like, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. I would totally do that for an anniversary.
It was delightful. I have to say, it wasn't like we didn't go for the tacky Las Vegas wedding. We're both Jewish. I wasn't going to get married in a church or a chapel. So it was just a non-denominational in a very nice restaurant. We found this wedding package, all in, meal, champagne, some flowers. And we did it in that way, really out of respect for our kids. He has 2 kids who are amazing adults who were still grieving the loss of their mother. It was 5 years after her passing, but it would have been painful for them, and we didn't want to subject them to that. It wasn't important to. My son was good either way, but that's what we chose to do, and it was the right thing for us.
Wonderful. So happy for you. I want to ask, what's the most surprising thing about being remarried? Like when you thought about it before, although you were already partnered. So, but I want to hear if you have like, here's something I didn't expect to happen, or something I didn't expect to experience, or I didn't think would happen for me, and it has in my remarriage.
Well, there are so many things. I pinch myself on the daily. I remember today we were just making the bed together as we were heading down to cycle in the basement. We have a little cycling studio. I pinched myself and thought, this is what I always hoped for. I never realized that you could have a husband who's your best friend, where you actually choose to spend tons of time together recreationally, but we are also on these amazing trajectories in terms of our professions, our careers, our businesses, and there's so much support, and it's just been an incredible experience. I didn't ever realize that existed before. It was not the model in front of me with my parents, and it certainly wasn't my previous marriage. I never knew that this could be, that you can have somebody with you that would help propel you along this trajectory.
Yes, I know. And if you haven't experienced it before, it's really hard to imagine experiencing it. And I think that's one of the things I try to give my clients when they have a lot of objections to wanting to date or wanting to commit. And I'm like, I know you can't imagine it because you haven't experienced it, but if you could imagine it, what do you think it would look like? What would you want it to look like? And so I help them piece together like a vision of what it could look like, sometimes from other areas of their life, things they've experienced at work, things they've experienced with friends, things they've experienced with, connections that they have with other people. And we piece together this vision for them of what a remarriage could look like. And usually it turns out to be like, see, it actually exists in the world.
Yeah, well, I think you're a wonderful example of what's possible for clients. And I know you try to feature other people who are.
Thank you. Yes, I want to be a collector of all the happily remarried after stories because I couldn't find any. And they started popping up in weird places. And I was like, wait, there's a lot of happily remarried people. And I mean, I know there are statistics of second, third marriages not working, but I think you can find evidence. I have a question around the evidence around that. I know statistically that's what it says, but I was like, well, has anyone actually tracked those who got remarried and stayed happily remarried after? Is anyone talking to these people? Or are we only talking?
What do you think are the elements that separate the second and third marriages that are successful from those that end up in divorce?
Well, one is the thought that second and third marriages are not going to be successful, because that's the general thought out there. So that's the first thing. I didn't believe that. I believe that. I was like, listen, I like marriage. I like being married. I like people. I've always wanted to be married. I'm pretty sure I can find someone I can do this with. So that was my thought going out. I think what's missing is just a re-education, right? So whatever education got you into the first marriage, you just have to change what you're thinking, what you know. And when I look back at, myself and a lot of my clients and how we picked our first spouse, we just didn't understand what you're supposed to look for, right? So I looked for someone who was ambitious and worked hard and made money, or, things like that, all of the surface things. And on the second time around, I was like, well, I just need to find someone who is actually compatible with me mentally and emotionally, who is kind, like you said, a lot of the more subtle character traits. And of course, for those of us who went through a high conflict divorce, we got our PhD in psychology by the time we were done, an unacknowledged PhD in psychology. So it really became clear what to look for, what not to look for, to look for kindness, to look for flexibility, the ability to resolve conflict and negotiate, the ability to have a disagreement and yet still be connected. All of those more subtle characteristics in a human. And that's all it took, was for me to say, okay, what do I need to change in me, my healing journey? Because I also have some childhood stuff going, like I said, changing all of that, and then knowing what to look for, and then knowing how to be in a successful relationship. It's just a re-education.
Yeah. As you were speaking, I had a thought that I want to share, which is really having gone through a high conflict divorce actually would make you an expert at choosing the right partner for a second or third marriage.
Yes. It should. It depends on what you're paying attention to along the way. And there's a period of also healing from all of that.
Of course.
So in and of itself, I don't know that it does, but it gives you all the material that you need.
Yeah.
To learn, none of all of this. Because I've also found, I think some of my clients that I've worked with assume that a person who is nice, they don't have a right to say no to someone who's nice because they're nice, just because their exes were so abusive. But a nice person who is nice and pleasant may not necessarily be the right person for you.
That's right.
As well. So you don't want to swing from one extreme to the other. You really want to slow down, like you said, and examine the thoughts that you're having and the interpretations and the assumptions that you might be making along the way. Yeah. Well, Stacey, your story is so encouraging. I am just a huge fan of your work. And for sure, we'll want you back on the podcast. Could you tell the listeners, if they want to work with you, and I know many people listening now and listening in the future will need your services, could you just spell out a couple of places where they can find you on the internet? And of course, we'll link it all up in the show notes.
Yeah. So my name is Stacey Mendelson. The business is Lifeline Coaching and Consulting. I have my website is www.lifelinecoaching.ca.
You're in Canada. Yes, we need to remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stacey. Your story is so amazing. Listeners, please follow Stacey. Recommend her services to anyone you know going through this. We all know women who are going through this, right? So please make sure you get the word out about the important work that she's doing. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening today. If you are ready to get married after divorce, I want to invite you to download my free 8-video training specifically designed to help divorced women date with ease and get married again. head over to sadecurry.com to get started. That's SADECURRY.com. I'll see you inside.